You're still a little loud, Angela.
You've added a whole
Okay.
another.
Angela, you will cue me to the last question.
And you are into.
Good evening, I'm Maria Hinojosa. Tonight's special edition of New York Hotline, African Americans and the Educational System. Despite the inroads that have been made during the 1960s in the civil rights movement, young African Americans today still face major challenges, a devastating high school dropout rate and low college enrollment. Faced with this crisis, parents, educators, and administrators are searching for viable solutions. One such proposal for an alternative high school, the Ujamaa Institute, has drawn both praise and criticism. African Americans are divided on the proposal. I'd like to introduce my guests who will be discussing these pressing issues with us. They are Bazir Mchawi with the Office of Curriculum and Instruction for the Board of Education and author of the Ujamaa proposal, and Booker T. Coleman, Director of Social Studies for District 9 in the Bronx. And hopefully joining us later, Michael Myers, Executive Director of the New York City Civil Rights Coalition. Making the curriculum more culturally inclusive is what some educators believe is a needed reform. Before we begin tonight's discussion, let's look at how some teachers are doing just that.
How many people believe that family was an important factor in African heritage? How many people believe that family has also played an important role in American heritage? What is one of the few things that has perhaps broken down the family to some extent from those people who came from the Yoruba tribes where they had the two-room architectured house, to those people who came to Haiti where they had the three-room architectured house, to those that came to America where they had a little larger, what we call the shotgun house. Latia?
The whites didn't think that the blacks should live like they did.
Okay, maybe they didn't think family was important. And what is the one thing that they did to break up the families? Earl?
They took them away from their family and took them as slaves.
Let me see by a show of hands, how many people believe that, yes, African heritage has affected American culture and history?
I use an African American focus in my classroom every single day. One, because I am African American, and two, because a large percentage of the children that I teach are African Americans. Knowing who you are and being comfortable with the fact that you can express who you are and relate it to education and find things about yourself within the curriculum and understand that you are as important as anyone else and that it's okay to be who you are is the most important thing in education.
At this school, we try to have the whole contributions of African Americans throughout the school year so that it's not any isolated time, it's not something that's set apart and looked at without relation to a whole continuum of what's been happening over a period of time. I try to show the interrelatedness of learning, because my philosophy is that things in life are integrated. Things do not exist in isolation.
In this book, we're going to go through the alphabet again, and I want you to help me with the letters. What's the first letter we expect to see? A. And we're going to find a picture in this book of a person who does a job that starts with the letter A. A is for architect.
Architect.
An architect is a person who builds something. An architect is a person who makes buildings. Does anybody here think they might want to be an architect?
No.
What would you build? What kind of building would you make?
Tall building.
A tall building. Okay, very good. Next letter that we expect to see?
B.
B is for botanist. A botanist is a person who works with flowers.
Without necessarily stating, okay, we're going to look at pictures of children who are African American children to use the concept of teaching the alphabet, I will simply use the book, which has photographs which look just like them of African children.
Eugenia Clark, a teacher at an elementary school in Harlem, believes that curriculum today only exposes children to a part of what they should be taught.
Standard curriculum is not inclusive enough. It does not say enough about the many peoples. We want to talk about this beautiful mosaic. Well, if it is a beautiful mosaic, then the beauty should all be counted in. And it is not just Eurocentric beauty. There is something to be contributed from all of the cultures that are represented in this country. And African Americans and Hispanic Americans are definitely not a part of the mosaic when we look at our curriculum and we look at what is being taught.
Ms. Barron at PS 41 agrees that there are shortcomings in the range of what is taught in the schools.
The curriculum needs to be the total picture, a more accurate picture. I don't think that if you're giving a child a part of a truth, that you're enabling that child to have the equipment that he needs to go on and to apply his knowledge in a broader curriculum, a broader setting, and to be a full citizen. I think that the thrust that's currently afoot for the curriculum of inclusion is a culmination of many things. It's a culmination of all that we went through during the 60s. It's a culmination of a period of lull and reaction that came about following that, of people feeling that they were being repressed, and of children now coming to parents who feel that they can't identify themselves in this society, they can't see their worth, and they don't want this to be perpetuated with their own children. I think that those persons who are my age group and younger see the need for this society to be more accurate in its portrayal of what has been the contributions of all people.
We've just seen two approaches to supplementing standard curricula with cultural material. And across the city, people are trying to include more cultural information into their material. What has caused this movement, and what have been the basic flaws with the educational system and what it's done for African Americans? Booker T.
I think one of the things is that our children are not seeing themselves in the classroom. They're not seeing themselves in the textbook. And this is one of the things that is very much needed in the growth and development of a child, no matter what background they may come from. The educational system doesn't do this. And I think it's important that all cultures be included so that children can see themselves.
Okay. What about you, Bazir? What's your perspective on how the educational system has failed African Americans?
Well, it's failed African Americans and just students in general, in that what we receive is an inaccurate picture of what has actually occurred in the world. And the kinds of distortions that people claim to be history at this particular point need to be changed so that we can actually get to the truth. I think it's not a matter so much of having a curriculum of inclusion as much as having a curriculum of truth. that we have to begin to tell the truth about our experience here in this country, about the experiences of many peoples around the world, and what that means to the development of world civilization as we know it.
Michael, do you agree with that? Do you think that what's been left out is the truth from what's been taught in the schools, and that that's had the negative impact on African Americans?
Well, the whole truth has not been told. But, you know, too often black Americans are the sidebar to American history, to world history. Even in the textbooks, they'll have a picture of Frederick Douglass, or have a picture of Booker T. Washington, and that's supposed to be the first and the end of black history, or black contributions to history. I mean, it's not the case. So it's been spotty, it's been lost, it's been stolen, it's been strayed. But also, in terms of literature, blacks are not seen as literate people. People don't know, it's been an omission. People don't know who County Cullen was. They don't know all the great writers, Lorraine Hansberry, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been an omission on the part of blacks. But I think the fundamental problem with the miseducation of Americans, black and white, is an issue of not really expecting children to learn. We make up excuses for children not learning. We make up excuses for not holding teachers accountable for effectively teaching our children. It doesn't matter what race they are, it doesn't matter what color they are. They're not being educated. This is white, this is black, this is Hispanic, this is Asian. So they have to be educated. Education, the whole purpose of education is to broaden one's horizons, to have children become critical thinkers. Okay, well, to expose prejudice and stereotypes and to extirpate them.
Well, let me read something to you that might shed some light on this discussion. In a recent article in the Harvard Educational Review, the early 20th century educator Edward Coverley is quoted as summarizing the curriculum and policy objectives of the American educational system in these terms. Our task is to assimilate these people, racial minorities and immigrants, as part of the American race, and to implant in their children, so far as can be done, the Anglo-Saxon conceptions of righteousness, law, order, and popular government. Do you feel this is true, that this is still what's happening? This is from a recent article, even though it's quoting an early 20th century writer.
Well, there have been attempts to assimilate people. I mean, we talk about the idea of a great melting pot. I think that the erroneous kind of situation there is that it's more or less like a stew in which each ingredient maintains its own individual flavor. So we have a country that's composed of many different parts. African Americans, Latino, many different kinds of groups. And each group, even though there have been attempts historically to try to assimilate and try to more or less homogenize everyone, that it has not worked. And that each group has maintained a sense of individuality and a sense of who they are.
Mm-hmm. So what has to happen now? What are the specific proposals, for example, that you have, Booker, in terms of how to do this, how to meet the needs of the various different cultures that we have right now in this city, in this country?
In terms of curriculum writing and staff development is where I really spend most of my time. And what we're attempting to do is to take culture and make it... This is in your school? This is in District 9, as well as other places that I've visited to consult with what they're doing. And basically what we're attempting to do is to take the materials that we have and take it from a cultural perspective and to teach. One of the things that's happening is that we are confusing the issue. Like just one thing in particular in your opening lines. And while I'm not saying you wrote this, I am saying that the community is not divided on this. The community is confused.
You mean the African American community?
I'm speaking about communities of culture, Latino culture, Indigenous American. Whenever we want to begin to talk about ourselves, people begin to try to divert attention. The community is not divided. They just do not know exactly what's the issue. We hear words like ethnic cheerleading and these other types of words. We're not talking about ethnic cheerleading. We're talking about academic excellence. And what we're saying is that you can take mathematics and science and the other subjects that are at hand, communication arts, art, music, and you can infuse cultures of the Latino, of the African. And of course, I do not separate the Latino from the African culture. Cultures of the Caribbean. And you can learn using culture from that perspective. And what I see happening now is that people are afraid. And what we need to do is we need to come to our communities and to let them know exactly what it is that we plan to do. And what that is to develop curriculum that shows all cultures in a very positive light, and as well as their negative light, whatever it is, but to infuse it from a discipline, from a math, from a science. It's not ethnic cheerleading. For our young people to understand what the pyramids are about is dead history. What we've got to do with our young people is understand that great mathematics, great science, great astronomy went into the building of the pyramids, and if they did it then, we can then master mathematics, the science, and everything else needed, return to our communities, and to contribute to our communities to build them
I'd like to address your initial question because they have a perspective and I have a different one. Right and wrong is not based on race. Right and wrong is not based on culture. Truth is not based on race. It's not race-based. It's not cultural-based. Facts can be skewed. Facts can be distorted. The picture can be distorted by various people for various purposes. But the point is that aside from the issue of assimilation, I think in some ways a lot of children become assimilated into their society. There are reasons for assimilation, other than their identity as individuals and their identity in terms of culture and race. There's a reason for assimilation. There's also an American culture. In American society, like other societies, cultures mix. Cultures are not like water and oil. They do mix, and therefore, if that's what you mean by assimilation, or if that's what you mean by integration, then that happens in American society. So I would say that there is definitely a need for that kind of mainstreaming on the part of what public education is all about. So culture, again, and particularly in terms of children, and too often adults impose their own concept of race and their own concepts of culture on children. Children can learn despite where their background is, regardless whether or not there's one parent family, regardless of whether or not they have books in their home. If they have a good teacher in the classroom, they can turn them on to learning. And of course, all children need science and math and history and literature. People ought to know who Langston Hughes was.
Well, but you're saying that something needs to be done, that it's not just enough to talk in these inclusive terms, let's say, for example, that Booker or even Michael has said, but something other specifically has to be done. What is it that you're saying needs to be done in order to give quality education for African Americans?
Well, at this particular time, we're kind of locked into a discussion or a debate, and I think that it's time that we begin to move curriculum development forward. I think that at this particular point, the contributions of the African American, the contributions of African people, the contributions of Latinos have just been ignored. What Native Americans have brought to this country, what the Asians have done in regards to building what this country is, it's not in the textbooks. And we need to put it where it was, because these are things that have happened. These are facts. This is truth. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, I mean, if we look at things like the slave trade, which is glossed over in textbooks, that if not for the slave trade, there would have been no industrial revolution. There would have been no industries like banking, like shipbuilding, many of the kinds of technologies that were built in the 17th, 18th centuries were based specifically on the slave trade. But it is not acknowledged that it is in fact the slave trade that is the cause of the Industrial Revolution.
But you're also saying that it has to go beyond that. You're saying, for example, in your proposal, the Ujamaa Institute, specific things about gearing education for African Americans and Latinos, and to institute a school that's going to do this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, in terms of Ujamaa Institute, I talk about an Africa-centered multicultural alternative high school. And by that I mean that the center of our perspective and analysis will be that of African American people in the broadest sense. So we're talking about Africans throughout the diaspora, and that includes in some cases many people who don't consider themselves Africans, who happen to really be African. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at many cultures through, for instance, one of the things we talk about, the study of the family. The word Ujamaa itself means familyhood. And one of the things we want to do is we want to study the family from a sociological and anthropological perspective. And in doing so, although our perspective will still be that of African people, we will look at, for instance, the cultures of various peoples in Asia, the cultures of various peoples around the world, and look at the kinds of cross-fertilization that has occurred. I mean, for instance, if we look at Puerto Rico, we have the Taino and Carib Indians and African slaves. If we look at even in the southern part of this country, runaway slaves would go and would hide with Native Americans. So we've got situations in which there's been a great deal of cross-fertilization. And I think in terms of being multicultural, it is consistent that it is possible to be both Africa-centered and multicultural.
Well, before you get, I can see Michael sort of rolling his eyes here, and I do want to say that callers, we are very interested in taking your calls in the show, and we're interested in having your questions on this. But before you jump in, Michael, and start honing in here on your opponent, Bazir, are we making too much issue? Are we taking too much issue with just one proposal for one school? Isn't the broader issue the devastating dropout rate we're talking about in terms of the whole school system, 80% of the school system? I mean, isn't that what we should be talking about instead of fighting about one particular institute?
No, we're fighting the institute because the institute is a distraction from that concern. I think you're right. There is a large problem in New York and other communities and other cities around this country, particularly in terms of the public school system. It's massive failure. And we've got to build in systems of accountability to make sure our children have the highest academic achievement. But the problem is that these proposals like these are so diversionary, so distracting. It sounds like a recycling of separate but equal back there in the 1950s.
Booker, is this true what Michael is saying? I mean, is, for example, the possibility of an Ujamaa Institute, is this distracting us from the broader picture of the fundamental problems we're talking about, an alarming dropout rate, low college enrollment?
Well, one thing I'd like to say is Mr. Myers is not my opponent. He just happens to be my long-lost brother. And I think one day he will find himself. I think one of the most important things that we have to understand, I have seen the proposal. From a curriculum perspective, from a staff development perspective, I totally support it. The system has failed our children. What we're saying, we're taking the responsibility out of their hands and taking it upon ourselves as a community to do something. It is not distracting, it's what's needed. And it was needed yesterday. And I applaud my brother Basir for being the warrior and for sticking in there and doing the things that are necessary. While all other peoples go around and talk about this and talk about it, he's doing something. And I think it's time for us to begin to develop things for our children. I have been in the classroom. I'm coming out of a special education classroom today working with 8th graders. I present concepts to them from their cultural perspective. And prior to doing it, they could not name the 9 planets. And after I presented it to them from a cultural perspective, they not only knew the 9 planets, but they understood their relationship with the universe. And these are some of the things, the central issue of familyhood and values must be brought back.
Well, let me ask you this, Michael.
Yes.
What about the people who, like Booker, say the system has failed us? We are not prepared to put our children once again into to maintain the status quo or to wait for it to adjust. And so they're saying we'd be willing to send our children to an Ujamaa Institute, anything that's going to save more children.
No.
What about people who say that?
No. First of all, I don't know what long-lost brother means. It sounds like a lot of racial rhetoric. But aside, another distraction. But I don't know how many more demonstration projects we need to show that separatism is wrong and separatism is idiotic and separatism and segregation, particularly when you assign children to a school based on their race, is illegal and unconstitutional. I don't know how many demonstration projects we need. This proposal has been changed to include Hispanics now because they know that the identification of children on basis of their race and the faculty based on their race is illegal, and the proposal is dead in the water. They're trying to make it more popular and getting more recruits to support the proposal.
There have been no changes.
Of course there's been changes. It started off of a black male. It started off of a blac male school. It's no longer black male. By the way, La Familia means family too. So why do you want to focus on Ujamaa? I mean, this is Afrocentric, racist nonsense.
Well, let me ask you. Let me ask you something, Bazir. Let me just take one point that he did say. Let me just ask you this one question, okay? He did say something that I have to pick up on. He said, La Familia means family also. What makes you necessarily think that Latinos and not all of them, for example, consider themselves as having strong ties to Africa, are going to be very interested in an Afrocentric or Africa-centered curriculum. What about those who may not be accepting of it? Are we going to lose those students, for example?
Not at all. What we're saying is that there is a segment of the Latino community that will, in fact, be interested in Ujamaa Institute, and they need to have the choice to come to a school like Ujamaa. I think one of the problems has been is that in our communities we have not had the options, the choices that we need. I mean, there are schools for performing arts, there are schools for many different kinds of things. What we're saying is that one of the schools that we need is one that is going to be an Africa-centered, multicultural, alternative high school, and that's Ujamaa. As far as it being a distraction, one of the things that we've done in Ujamaa Institute is provided so many innovative things in regards to it, aside from curriculum, in terms of structure, in terms of governance, in terms of instructional methodology, that this is going to be something which is going to move the entire system in a direction that people will begin to clamor for more Ujamaa Institutes. And people like Michael Myers, who are out of touch with the African American community, who have no links and roots, parents call, students call, people want to come. They want the school open now. It's not a matter of segregation, because we need to talk about segregation.
One second, please. I want to pick up on something you said, but first I want to open this up to our audience. So I'd like to take your call right now. You're on New York Hotline. Go ahead, please. Go ahead. Hello? You're on New York Hotline. I'll give you one more chance. Okay.
You see, I'm hearing catchwords, and I think it's very careful. We're not talking about segregation. District 9, in collaboration and working very closely with the Caribbean Culture Center, this past weekend had a conference. We included people from the Asian community, Latino community, from all across the Caribbean, people of African American descent. We're not talking about segregation. Our children have to know every culture that exists in the world. What we are saying is that there is a way in which we can teach our children the things that they need to know, because the system has failed. We are confronting many different problems. I am a teacher. I'm an educator. I see these children every day. I cannot see where he can say students don't want it. I'm in the classroom. I believe he's not in education.
Children don't want segregation.
Please.
Come on.
Listen, segregation. I'm not talking segregation.
Children do. We're not talking segregation. We're living in a pluralistic society. When you put, let me finish. When you live in a pluralistic society, and granted, we live in a highly structured racial caste society as well, and too often, what you call it segregation or separatism, or what do you call it, schools, or what do you call schools that are segregated by virtue of fact as opposed to law. The fact is that too many people have given up on the fight for integration. We've got to teach children how to learn in an integrated, multicultural, pluralistic society. And we don't teach children that, teaching them separate from one another. Blacks, the balkanization of the public school system is wrong, and it should be resisted and opposed by blacks, not acquiesced to.
Okay, one second. Let me get my phone call back. All right, you're on New York Hotline right now. Go ahead, please. Yes, go ahead.
Hello.
We're hearing you. Go ahead.
Talk.
Hello. Go ahead.
Hello.
Talk.
Talk.
We can hear you. Talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just had a little boy. He's 14 months old, and I think this school basically is the answer to a prayer. For such a long time, our public school system, the education system itself, has basically excluded teaching Afro-American children about themselves, and it has not worked. It is time for us to take a pride in ourselves and allow these men to try this. The system has definitely failed. I'm a mother, I'm 28 years old, and I'm afraid for my son when he enters into the education system. Will he be taught to have a low self-esteem? Will he be taught the values of his people? That to me is important to him, because only through learning at an early age will he be able to face society with a positive self-image that will enable him to go on. I can't really understand why Mr. Myers is so against it. I think it's time to try something else that is new. We can't stick with the same system. It's definitely not working.
Okay, thank you. Michael, here's somebody who has that perspective.
Well, that's one perspective. I believe it's a minority perspective, so excuse the pun. But it is really a situation where I don't know what values of one's people means. I really don't. Again, this is racial nonsense. Race is a myth. Race is a myth. Skin color, the glorification of skin color, in terms of how people live and how they're brought up and what their values are. People don't. There's no such thing as black experience that cannot be shared with whites, with Asians, with Hispanics. And there's no reason why. And there's no reason why. And there's no reason why you cannot, in an integrated setting, in a classroom where everybody is, teach people about African American history. There's no reason. And blacks should know about Latin history and Asians.
Let's talk about this. Let me put a question to you, Bazir.
And then we have
there are people who are going to say, if we go for the Ujamaa Institute, if we go for this kind of an idea, we are basically saying we have lost the struggle in integration, the struggle so many people struggled so hard to get. Are you saying that integration simply hasn't worked, that an integrated school has not worked? And are you saying that segregation...
Well, let's look at it. Let's look at the issue of integration versus segregation. At this point in the New York City school system, 80% of the students are African American, Latino, and Asian. Only 20% are white. In the public schools. If we said that 50% would be the ideal people of color and white student combination 50-50, we could only integrate 20% of the schools. What would we do with the other 80% of the students? If we look at high schools, I looked at 7 high schools in Brooklyn. Boys and Girls High School, Wingate, Erasmus, Tilden, Sarah J. Hale, Bushwick, Eastern District. Each of those schools had African American and Latino populations. The percentages were 98.7% or better. So the idea of integration, while it's some kind of ideal that people like Michael Myers, still would attempt to try to impose on people some kind of way, it can't happen. It can't happen now. It hasn't happened. In 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, a landmark Supreme Court ruling. Our schools today in New York City are more segregated today than they were in 1954. So we have to really talk about a failure of certain kinds of strategies.
So why do you need a black male school if that's the case?
Again, I don't know what he's talking about. The proposal, originally, we've talked about a co-educational school all along, and I don't know what in the world Michael Myers is talking about.
I read the proposal that you wrote.
Well, can you read? That's the issue.
All right, wait, before we get into this, let me take another call. You're on New York Hotline. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we're hearing you. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Hello?
Go ahead. Go ahead. We'll try this one more time. We can hear you. Go ahead.
You hearing me?
Read my lips.
Yes. My name is Derek. I'm from Brooklyn. Actually, I'm from the islands. When I was growing up, I realized most of what I learned at an early age, I learned from practical experience, meaning that you do things as a youth. The fact that we are in the big cities and that our youths, African youths, African people as a whole are connected to the land, the animals, they're connected to plants and animals, or things of nature. The fact that we are in big cities and our kids are having problem learning, is there a connection, as the panel said, between things of nature and learning in the school? It's more difficult for teachers to teach because our youths are not in the field looking at other things of nature.
It's an interesting question.
Very important question also.
Yes.
Because in the development of curriculum, one of the most important things is that there has been a dislocation of students with nature. Whether we're dealing with the origin of the universe, whether we're dealing with earth science, there was a connection with nature. And these are some of the things that we have got to bring back to our children. Another very important part of the curriculum is to have more field trips, to have children go out, to experience more things, to be able to deal with the world around them. And I'm talking about kindergarten children, first grade children going for neighborhood walks, looking at what's going on, visiting the bodegas, going into the different stores in the community, and that's going straight up to high school to get out and to look at the community and to, again, make a touch with nature and to understand it. I grew up in New York City. My first trip out of this country to the Caribbean was to Jamaica. and I thought I was in paradise. And I think for many of our young people who are not exposed to that type of environment, they lose a great deal because as the gentleman said, their nature is of one and their environment is of another. So this is all part of the curriculum. And we're not just dealing with curriculum, we're dealing with self-esteem. I mean, I know as a young...
But let me ask you this. Why not have, I mean, you're talking about wonderful things. You're talking about making ties to nature. You're talking about a lot of very important things.
Kids.
In fact, wait one second. In fact, in the proposal, you have said smaller classrooms, smaller schools, specific parent involvement, teacher teaching, this kind of thing. I mean, these are things that should be available, don't you think, to every child, white, black, Latino, Asian. What about a school that really is preaching this for all students and not just for the African Americans or Latinos?
Well, you know, as we said, Ujamaa Institute will be open to everybody, and we believe that there will be fledgling Paul Simons and David Burns who have gone and studied African and African American culture and incorporated that into what they do. So we figure that there will be some students of other ethnicities and races who will come to Ujamaa Institute.
But do you really think, given the press that I know that you believe Bazir has mischaracterized the proposal of the Ujamaa Institute and limited it to a black male school. But given that press, how willing do you think mothers will be to send their daughters to this school, or Asians will be to send their children to this school, or Anglos will be to send their children to this school?
Women at this point, I have conversations with parents who have daughters, and they understand that Ujamaa Institute will in fact be a nurturing environment for females as well. It will be an environment in which all students will be welcome and they will feel welcome. We will not have any signs in terms of you know, certain races are not welcome here. It's going to be open, and they will be made to feel welcome, clearly.
They won't have a sign that says this is a door to a dungeon, but nevertheless it will be the door to a dungeon. And they will have their freedom in that dungeon. It will be wall-to-wall freedom.
Are you saying it's a door to a dungeon because it's specifically...
It's isolationist, yes. You know, this rhetoric, and it's just euphemism. The school will be open. Oh, gee whiz. You're going to have a school with Ujamaa sign, as opposed to La Familia. And you will have it in the black ghetto someplace, and you will have it on the campus of a black college, probably Medgar Evers. And you expect people, white people, Hispanic people, Asian people, and other people, to come to a school for 400 kids, which you say is open to them, and then there's going to be admissions criteria. Now, who's going to make those decisions about admissions? Who's going to decide how many males are going to be versus females? Who's going to say how many blacks are going to be versus non-blacks? This is, again, Afrocentric. An Africa-centered curriculum. So there's going to be invidious discriminatory decisions made at the outset. That's why I say this euphemism about open school is ridiculous.
Okay, let me open this up to another phone call. We'd like to take your call right now. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Can
Go
you
ahead.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Back in 1986, two sociologists, John Ugbu of UCal Berkeley and Cynthia Fordham of Georgetown University, wrote a paper called "Coping with the Burden of Acting White." And what the paper was, the thesis of the paper was that due to the fact of miseducation and non-inclusion in the curriculums of most schools, most black people, the byproduct of such is that most black students feel that scholarship and education is a white value. So therefore, they turn away from it. And given Mr. Meyer's rhetoric throughout this whole discussion, what solutions do you propose to counteract this nemesis in the community that black students feel that scholarship and education is a white value?
What do you propose, Michael?
Again, the white value, black values, I don't see values in terms of skin color or race. But I do believe that the approach to raising the standards of education is not one that can be now in 1991 carried out in a demonstration project sort of thing where you polish up 400 kids and prove something that you can teach 400 kids in a small school with career counseling, academic counseling, and immersion in math and science. Of course you can do that with 400 kids. I don't care what color they are. So I mean, they set up their model and they say we've proved that we can educate children. That's not proving anything. What we have to do with all the public schools in the city of New York and in other cities in this country, we've got to hold teachers accountable for effectively teaching our children. We got to make sure the leadership, the principals, and the superintendents require accountability. They don't make excuses. And if teachers can't teach, get them out of the classroom. We blame the victims. We blame our children for not being able to learn. We blame their background. We blame their parents. We blame their communities. We keep blaming everyone but the classroom, the school teachers. So I say, let's get a board education that will stop fighting one another over the crumbs of status and patronage and all that other stuff, and get a board education that is really concerned about raising the academic achievement of our kids, and no more excuses. And if they can't do it, put them out. And if the mayor can't hold them accountable, and if the borough presidents can't hold them accountable, then let's go to the polls as a community, not as a community of blacks, but as a community of outraged citizens who want the public school system in the city of New York to be excellent, and put aside all those excuses that our children can't learn, because they can learn, they do learn.
I think he should talk to the UFT when he talks about getting rid of teachers so quickly.
I'm talking about the UFT. That's right, I'm talking about the UFT.
You got a lifetime.
We need a power base to counteract
One
their
thing
power.
I would like to do is I would like to call Mr. Myers out, because, again, I would have no problem with going to a school entitled La Familia, and I would send my child. I would send my child to a school of indigenous background called Morning Star. I would send my child to an Asian American school. I would send my child to a school where he, or in my particular case, she sees herself. The schools do not see it. I have seen progress in children when children see themselves in a textbook, see themselves on the classroom walls, and that they're able to see where they fit in history. And this curriculum does not do it. The textbooks do not do it. I have seen success. I'm in the classroom every day. I do staff development for 33 schools. I see the staff coming around and beginning to see the part that culture plays as a tool to academic excellence. I know nothing about excluding anybody or segregation or separating anybody, and I would never do that.
But what about those teachers? I mean, teachers ultimately are the ones who teach. If we have teachers who are culturally insensitive in a diverse society, shouldn't we be teaching? I mean, how much good is it going to do if you have an Africa-centered or a multicultural curriculum if you have a teacher who may be black but who still does not love teaching or does not love what she's doing? So don't we have to teach teachers to be more sensitive also and culturally sensitive?
We have to change the way that teachers are trained, clearly. And one of the things we have to do is we have to make them more culturally sensitive, obviously. I mean, one of the things, while there are requirements for you to take a certain number of education courses, there is no requirement for you to actually be grounded in the cultures of the young people you may actually be teaching. So, I mean, it's a clear contradiction. And many times we have teachers who may come from anywhere, and as you know, there have been recruitment efforts to bring teachers from all around the world, and they come in there stuck in a classroom, and they have no idea of who it is they're teaching and have not been sensitized to the cultures that they will actually be coming in contact with.
Okay, I want to take this back to another call right now. You're on New York Hotline, you're on the air, go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I wanted to say, Mr. Myers, that the school system is segregated right now, and I think it's something like 80–85% African American, and the administration is about just the opposite, about 80% non-African American. And the Ujamaa Institute is not a new idea.
Do you have a question, please? Let me get you to focus on a question.
Already implemented. The Jewish community have been successful in teaching their children about the world from a Jewish perspective.
It's not a public school.
And there's nothing wrong with African American or Latino Americans doing the same thing. And when the school system is not working as it is, and when no one is complaining about that, I resent someone jumping on someone else who is trying to come up with a new idea.
Well,
he asked a question of me, let me answer. I don't know of a deliberately Jewish public school in the city of New York. I don't know of deliberately public Jewish school anywhere in the country. No, and again, I mean, my argument is not with due respect to including blacks and other minorities in textbooks. My argument is not with you including minorities on the walls of the schools. That's not my argument. I don't have any argument with that. I think in every public school there ought to be Latins on the walls, there ought to be blacks on the walls, there ought to be Asians on the walls. A public school system ought to be inclusive. And we ought to teach children to extirpate prejudice, to not think in terms of stereotypes. And public school system is the one opportunity we have to acculturate our students, to make sure that people understand the virtue and the prize of living in a democratic, egalitarian, non-racist society. And we have to teach children those things. They don't learn that through osmosis. You have to be taught. And since we can't teach them through an integrated classroom, why, and this goes to the question that the questioner has, why when you have a situation which is primarily black and Hispanic already in terms of the public school system, why are you going to balkanize the school system further? Why are you going to say this classroom should be focused primarily on black culture, or this school should be focused on Italian culture, or this school should be focused on Hispanic culture?
Let me pick up on that. One second, Booker, wait, one second.
The important thing to understand is that we're not focusing on culture for culture's sake. We are focusing on culture as a tool to be used for the acquisition of basic and advanced skills such as getting information, using information, presenting information in a group or individual.
What is black culture?
Well, wait, let me ask you this.
The fact that what we're saying is this.
What is black culture? You define black culture.
There is something entitled...
Give me a chance here. What I want to say is that in the Milwaukee school system, okay, they have taken two predominantly black schools, which is what the caller was saying, that segregation does already exist, and they have converted them into special schools for black males. So why does Ujamaa have to be...
With black teachers?
One second. Why does Ujamaa have to be a separate school? In other words, if we already have schools that are predominantly black and Latino, why shouldn't the Ujamaa plan be introduced into those schools already? Why create a separate system, a separate institute? Why not do that kind of work within the schools that already exist, that are already, as this caller said, segregated?
Yeah, we looked at that possibility in regards to doing it, and due to a number of problems in terms of governance and the number of different people, if we were to go into an already existing school building and take a portion of that building and attempt to try to do something there, that there would be all kinds of problems in terms of the number of people who would attempt to have some kind of say over it. I mean, it's really interesting in regards to a problem of governance. As an example, myself and Assemblyman Green looked at Prospect Heights High School as a possibility of doing something in a portion of the school. And then in terms of looking at the negatives versus the positives, the pros and the cons, we decided that in terms of doing this, we needed to do this somewhere else first.
You're not answering.
But I think that
you're not answering the question.
Yeah, I think that the reason is because number one, it will be a lot easier to attempt to try to do what we're doing in this kind of situation. To do it in an already existing school, as I said, for instance, if we're talking about making it smaller, the idea of having 400 students in a building of 4,000 students, and then attempting to try to give extra resources.
But shouldn't you give this alternative to all of those students?
We will eventually.
It shouldn't be
Parents are saying, but wait, Wazir, parents are saying we don't want to wait any longer. We are tired of the system, so why not do it for all of the schools if they already are predominantly black and Latino?
You talked about many of the different kinds of things that we're doing that are positive, which you pointed out in regards to the proposal. I think that, unfortunately, in regards to a school system where we have 1,000 school buildings and almost 1 million students, that to attempt to try to do this across the board overnight is impossible. That we have to begin to phase this kind of school in on a limited basis, and we have to essentially try to make it work. You see already that the problem that this has caused in regards to attempting to say we want to do this in one place and begin to change the way that schools are structured in our communities. And you see the kind of controversy that it's caused.
Well, let me ask you this. What has the Board of Education, how is the Board of Education planning on using the Ujamaa proposal? Where are we at right now? Where are we at, and what is the board going to do with the Ujamaa proposal?
Well, we're moving ahead at this particular point. We will be involved, as it's been kind of inferred here, that we're going to be in a relationship with Medgar Evers College in creating a CUNY campus school similar to the 5 other CUNY campus schools that already exist. And we will be moving ahead in regards to creating Ujamaa Institute.
When are we talking about this?
And hopefully we'll be able to take in some students as early as September 1991.
There hasn't even been a public hearing yet on this proposal.
All right, let me
I have to interject with this 2 against 1. I have to have something
but
to
there
say
need
here.
not be any public hearing on this.
Because you're not really part of this. We're dealing with you.
Come on.
But you're not coming from an educational perspective. You're not coming from.
But his point of view is important. Let me do this.
Yes, it is, but it's not relevant.
1 second. I'm going to take a call right now.
They want to define
Michael,
black culture.
please.
No, we don't.
Hello. You're on New York
Hotline.
You're on New York Hotline. Please
Hello.
go ahead. Go ahead.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. This is actually a question for Michael Myers. I'm a little distracted myself in this discussion by your insistence on describing all of this as a segregationist relationship. So I'd like to wonder if you could consider rethinking your position, not by going back to 1954, but to go back to the late 60s to the separatist movements in colleges and high schools among African Americans, where many fine educational instructional programs were set up for black students, drawing on black culture, mixing math, science, history, and cultural learning. These were run by strong, powerful black student unions on the campuses. Those were very strong and powerful days. I taught in one. I really liked it. So I wonder if you could rethink your opposition on the basis of that. And a sort of corollary question is, I understand probably that you're a lawyer. Do you really believe that the truth is absolute and is not culturally relevant?
All right, it's a long question.
Two big questions.
Let me answer it. Number one, in terms of the college situation, I'm back in the 1960s, and there's case law on this entitled Sixth Violation. Several colleges, including Antioch College, set up separate black dormitories and separate Afro-American Studies institutes, which were ostensibly run by students. But decisions about who got into the classes and who got into the dormitories were sanctioned by the college, by the institution. And the law says when you have the state, or for this matter, in this particular case, the institution which receives federal funds, if you have a situation where they are involved in making decisions based on race, you run afoul of the Constitution, you run afoul of Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And therefore, anytime you have an assignment based on race, or your exclusionary for an exclusionary purpose or an exclusionary effect, you're going to run into legal trouble. So that's why you have a situation when I say, when I say segregation, I'm saying that when the Board of Education, or if the Board of Education,
when the Board of Education,
if the Board of Education,
when the Board of Education
begins to assign teachers on the basis of race, or begins to assign students on the basis of race, then you have state action. You're going to have a legal challenge from Civil Liberties Union and maybe others, including the NAACP. But I have to answer the
quickly, because those are complicated questions.
Yeah, they're all complicated questions. So I don't think I need to rethink the issue of segregation. The issue of segregation is an old story. It's a siren song of separatism. You're right. It's back in the 60s. This is very much reminiscent of the 60s. And I'm bored by segregation. I really am. I am a militant integrationist, and I want to try integration. I want to try to break down the barriers that now exist between children based on a flimsy basis of their skin color.
Okay, Booker, let me ask you this. There are people who have criticized the Afrocentric or Africa-centered ideas as tribalizing our society. So if we're tribalizing our society, what happens to white children? What happens to whites within this
I think it's very important, first of all, to realize that all life came out of Africa. So children of European descent also, their destiny is also wrapped up in this history also. I do not separate anybody. It is very important for all children to get a sense of this history and curriculum. And what I can say is that in terms of the format of Mr. Mchawi's proposal, as you said, it fits any school pattern, any culture. And it will work, and it will educate our children, and it will give them role models to emulate.
Well, I'm still wondering, though, what happens, for example, for those whites who believe that Afrocentrism or Africa-centered is really swinging the pendulum from Eurocentric teaching to the other side.
No. Because European American education was meant to
I mean, are they really going to be willing to say?
No, I would not. I will not go the other way and do to children what was done to them in another way. Cultural education is a tool. It has been used by the Western world as a weapon. And it has literally impacted on the self-esteem and the critical thinking skills of our children that leads to academic excellence. And when children are introduced to cultural material from a cultural perspective that they can tap into, as the earlier caller, the gentleman spoke about nature, there is something about the African diaspora that constantly relates back to nature. When we look at the Kemetic origin of the universe, which is the Memphite theology written by Africans thousands of years ago, it totally explained the theories of the creation of the universe. The only difference is that we have three Western theories of how the universe came into existence. You have James Jean, you have Professor Littleton, and you have Laplace. What the African theory does is combines all in terms of the passing star, in terms of the Big Bang, and in terms of the sun throwing off pieces of itself. And what I am saying is that if we take a curriculum like this and put it into the school system so that our children, they can master planetary science and see themselves in the universe. The Memphite theology goes on to deal with the development of the earth, and there is nothing different in today's modern science that differs from what the Africans were speaking about thousands of years ago. It is viable. I'm coming from a class just a few days ago where the children learned the universe. This morning, the children learned the universe. They did not know the universe prior to my coming. They know it now, and that's what's important. Academic excellence, not to be used as a weapon, to be used as a tool.
Okay,
and I just want to also ask our
quickly,
Latino
because I want to take
community,
a call before.
Please don't let them divide us on this issue. We are the same, somos unos, and we have to stay together. And during the conference this past weekend, there were people of Latino descent that said that they are interested in also bringing different types of lawsuits in order for the Latino child to see him and herself in the curriculum.
Okay,
I support my brothers and sisters.
Let me take this last call because we're coming up to a close. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, hi. I'd like to ask the people for the Ujamaa School, what specific subject or history matter would you teach that's not already available in the public high school system? When I went to high school, we learned black history. It's already there in every city school system and in every curricula in the system. What can you teach that is different? Would you teach specific black history of different tribes in Africa? Or what are we missing that you'd be teaching that we're not having?
Okay.
I mean, there's so many things that are missing. I mean, whether we talk about things like the invention of the electric light bulb and Lewis Latimer. Who is Lewis Latimer? Did you learn that when you went to high school? Who is Garrett Morgan, the person who invented the traffic light? Did you learn that? There's so many different kinds of things that have been excluded, and we can talk about whether we talk about inventions, whether we talk about science, whether we talk about literature. I mean, what kinds of literature did you read when you actually went to high school? I mean, did you read Langston Hughes? Did you read James Baldwin? Did you read Chester Himes? Did you read Toni Morrison? Did you read Alice Walker? Did you actually read all of that? And what I'm suggesting is that these things that I've talked about, and there's so many things, so many facts that have been excluded, are just not in schools.
And all children should read those authors and know those facts.
I agree. We're going to have to come to a close, but I do want to ask each of you briefly to comment on one last question, which is, what are the recommendations that each of you have that you would give to parents or concerned citizens in terms of what they should do about making changes within the educational system as we see it to make it better? What are the things that you would recommend briefly?
First of all, I would say to our parents, don't fall for this nonsense, this racial rhetoric, this siren song of separatism, this idiocy. Don't fall for it. It's a cop-out. He admitted it was a cop-out. He admitted it's too hard, it's too difficult to achieve real change for all of our kids, for most of our kids, for the majority of our kids. So we're going to go with this demonstration project for 400 kids. That's not good enough. I say we've got to build a parents association in the city. We've got to build a group of powerful citizens on behalf of students and on behalf of children to turn our system of public education around, so that we must insist on our children having high academic achievement. And that's what we need, not separatism, not racial organization, not nonsense about Africa and all that other stuff.
I suggest to go to your child's school, see what's actually going on, and when you find that there are many things missing, go somewhere and attempt to try to add and augment your child's education, because it is not complete. It is miseducation.
You got 10 seconds.
Self-esteem, critical thinking, culture as a tool to develop parental involvement, family, values, and please, be careful of people like Mr. Myers.
Okay, thank you all very much for being here. I really appreciate it. I got to close here. Thank you.
Try to confuse.
Listen, I think that we all agree that changing an entire system is a major initiative. one that needs a lot of careful examination and a lot of effort on the part of educators and parents working together. We hope that dialogues like this one will help to shed more light on this very important issue that affects everyone in this city and in the nation. Please tune in next month on March 27th when our special edition of New York Hotline will focus on the new women's movement. I'm Maria Hinojosa. Thank you and good night.
The preceding program has been brought to you in part by Brooklyn Union Gas, a diversified energy company meeting the needs and expectations of its customers, and by the continuing support of the WNYC Foundation.